Hey, a friend of mine dropped off this Roland Jazz Chorus 120, and the issue was the reverb wasn't working at all. So he wanted me to take a look at it, and what I did was to diagnose the problem. First I checked everything just to make sure that it was not working, because you never know. Then I took the chassis out, which was some screws on the top and on the sides and stuff, and found the little reverb tank. It was actually quite small. With the amplifier on, when I tapped it, I was getting that spring sound through the speakers. So I knew that reverb sound was coming out of the speakers, but it wasn't working when you plugged it in and actually had a guitar, or even just touching, wasn't getting any reverb sound. So I checked the little reverb tank, has two RCA plugs like most do, an input and an output. So I unplugged one of them, tapped on the reverb, and still heard springs. So figured, okay, that's the output from the springs, from the reverb tank. So I then unplugged that one that was plugged in the original one that I had unplugged, if that makes sense. So I unplugged A, left B plugged in and tapped. I'm just giving them letters. And heard reverb through the speakers. So I knew B was the output from the tank. Unplugged B, plugged A back in, tapped, heard nothing at all. So I knew that I had the input and the output. So then I traced from the output, because it was working, tap and you get the reverb sound. I traced the input wire, and it was a red wire, if I remember, a thin red wire, and I traced where that went to the circuit board and found that something had been bent and it was part of the wire was shorting out on something. So I just bent it over and turned the amp on and went and heard bzz, 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 and heard the reverb afterwards. So I figured it was good. Plugged in a guitar, tried it, reverb, perfect. Oh, and by the way, don't open up an amplifier unless you know what you're doing. There's dangerous stuff in there. So I had it working. So I put the chassis back in with two screws. Tested it, reverb still working. Put in all the rest of the screws, tested it, reverb still working. Put the back panel on, tested it, reverb still working. And here we are the next day, and I just tested it again, reverb still working. So it fixed the problem as far as I can tell. But if somebody, I guess it's not uncommon for the reverb to fail, that's a way to help diagnose the inputs and the outputs from the reverb tank. So there you go. Hopefully this helps somebody.